So let me introduce our speaker. Let me say a couple words and introduce our speaker, then I'll turn it right over to her. Welcome, everybody. I see some new faces this week, and I'm really glad that we can come together to study together and to be together. For those who are new to Tikva through text, this is a weekly study session that's focused on finding tikva, finding hope through the act of study. And I would expand that to finding positive emotion, finding safety, finding goodness, both in our community and in the act of study. This particular week is a particular moment, a particular post-election moment. And I know that some of you either registered or are here partly in response to that. And I'm glad that we can be together. I don't want to have a political discussion this afternoon. That's not why we're here. And yet, at the same time, just to recognize, to sort of note that one of the things that some people are feeling right now is a profound anxiety, lack of safety, and a wonder about what will come, about the what I would call the contract, the national contract of caring for the rights and freedoms of people. And so without getting political, I want to hold that as we move into our discussion that Rabbi Vann will lead us in, which is about Hashkiveinu, the blessing or the prayer that we say traditionally in the evenings about safety. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to say the blessing for study together. And then I'll very briefly introduce Rabbi Vann and turn things right over to her. So let me just share my screen. If you'd like to unmute and we can say the blessing for study together, then now is a good time for that. All right, let's say together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam means blessed is the eternal whose mitzvot, whose commandments make our lives holy, and who commands us to immerse ourselves, to engage ourselves in words of Torah. Rabbi Allison Vann has been the spiritual leader of Suburban Temple Kol Ami in the Cleveland area since 2011. And she has a very impressive bio that I'm not going to read now because I want us to have time to discuss. I'll just say that, among other things, she's part of the leadership team, the Religious Action Center of Ohio, an organizing committee bringing Reform Jews from across Ohio together in the pursuit of justice in our state. So let me now turn things right over to Rabbi Allison Vann.
Micah, I was sure you would talk about the dogs and, not Rack, Ohio.
Well,
I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing you. Talk about, safety and security, that what could be better than, a hug from a dog, right? If you're a dog lover. If you're not a dog lover, then forget it. I'm so honored and thrilled to be here. Micah emailed me over the summer and I immediately picked a date. So thank you for this opportunity to be with you. And also, I just want to shout out for a little reunion. You never know who you're going to find. And Lacey and I go way, way back to my time in San Antonio. And so it's really extra special. I chose a text, really not knowing what today would bring, but I chose this text a long time ago. I chose the text of Hashkiveinu. Hashkiveinu is a prayer that we share every Shabbat. And the reason I chose this text is because it's one of the prayers that has become a favorite in my congregation every Friday night. And it for years has symbolized protection and connection and safety. And so I wanted to share a little history with you, and then we'll look at some of the text together. One of the things that I find extraordinary, we have lots of Ohio connections. One of the things that I find extraordinary about this text is that pieces and parts of this text are among the oldest from our prayer book. So there's some research that shows that parts of the Hashkiveinu may be even from 800 BCE, that it might be among our oldest pieces and sentences from our Siddur. So why might that be? When we were wandering, as it were, through the desert, when we were nascent Jews, early Jews, um, was also physically a time when darkness was scary. You know, there wasn't always a time when there were lights, when there were cell phones, when there were all these things. We would sleep in total darkness with only the stars to guide us. And what was happening along the side of the road, what was happening along the way was rural areas were incredibly dangerous. You can imagine, right? If you've ever gone camping, not my favorite thing, but if you've ever gone camping, every time you hear a noise out there, it's a little scary, right? In addition to that, there are criminals, wandering thieves wandering the road. So it made sense that one of the earliest things we did was ask for protection. So the Hashkiveinu was one of the earliest prayers, because what do we need? We need to make it through the night. The first thing we can do is make it through the night. So these words were to make it through the night. I have two screens, so hold on one second. I want to share my screen. So every time I think I understand Zoom, then they change Zoom. So, whoops. I have to figure out now how to, there we go. Can you share? Can you see that? Yes? All good? Okay. So I'm going to scroll down, and what I want you to see is the traditional text. This is not the text if you use Mishkan Tefillah, or even if you use Sim Shalom. This is not the text you're going to see. This is the traditional text. And what I want you to note is, look out for us and keep enemies, plagues, swords, famines, troubles from our midst, and remove the adversary, remove Satan from in front of us and from behind us, and cradle us in the shadow of your wings. So this is really, truly a prayer for protection. A lot of this was removed from the prayer over the years. And in fact, the whole prayer was removed in early Reform liturgy, because this idea of a Satan was not something the early reformers were so enamored with. When it was re-engaged into Reform liturgy, what was emphasized was what we know and love. This idea of Ufros Aleinu Sukat Shlomecha, the shelter of your peace. So what I'm going to stop the share is I want to engage in, oh, I just saw David's text. Honestly, a sidebar, if you have like a ADHD, texting, the comments is amazing, right? Because you can be distracted and still be part of the conversation. So David writes, the shirt I'm wearing is about how amazing camping is. So when we have this, when we have Sukkot Shlomecha, why a sukkah, right? So when we want this total protection from God, a Sukkot Shlomecha, why a sukkah and not, spread over us a house, spread over us an igloo, something that's not porous, that's not completely protective? Why would we engage with a sukkah? Does anyone want to try to share something? You can put it in the text, you can unmute. Do I see any hands? Bob, go ahead.
Your protected from the elements to a degree, but not isolated.
Not
And
isolated. I love that.
if you want to be safe from bears or thieves in the night, you want to be aware of them. You don't want to pretend that you're going to be safe in a structure that really isn't quite as safe as you might think it is.
Okay.
Which might
You
be,
said two things that I think are particularly lovely, not isolated and aware. Thank you. Anyone else? Jan.
You don't want to isolate yourself from God.
Mm, that's beautiful. I love that. Anyone else? I'm scanning. I don't want to miss anybody. Lacey?
I think it's partly how so many of our prayers go to reminding God of our ancestors. That sukkah is that first protection God provided for us. And we always want to remind God of that enduring relationship and please remember what you did for our ancestors. And I think it can even go back to Gan Eden, that the first humans didn't even have a shelter, they had a garden. Maybe we even want to go back to that where we don't even need that protection. So please protect us now, but help us get back to that state.
That's so beautiful. The idea that the sukkah is made of nature, the way we were in nature in Gan Eden, and that there's a Lador Vador, a generational piece that we're going back in generation. The Sukkah connects us generation to generation. And the other pieces that I heard is, I'm looking at my notes, that we don't want to be isolated from God. We don't want to be isolated from each other. And we want to be aware. And then there's a comment in the chat. There's something remarkable about being vulnerable. If we're never vulnerable, we never have to make difficult choices. Wow. I gotta write that one down too. All of these are what the sukkah. Oh, Ellen, go ahead.
Yes, I think also he's trying to say, I'm not going to do everything for you. You have a responsibility also to protect yourself. So we're giving you some ownership.
I'm writing that. I'm writing everyone's down. That's why thank you. So we have some accountability. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. So beautiful, amazing. And then there's a comment here in the chat from Trisha. As long as nature endures, so does God. Thank you, Trisha. So we have all of this. So the sukkah, if we were totally protected, to wrap it up, that part up, if we were totally protected, then we're not part of anything. So the sukkah is a connective tissue, as it were, to what we need to be part of. And so what I'm hearing is that while we want to be safe and protected, we also need to be part of the picture as well. I went also through, honestly, since the election, and I read a number of blogs because I didn't want to bring just commentary. I wanted to bring something just from us. And I found someone named Leonard Felder who wrote, the Hashkiveinu is a prayer, is an ancient remedy for overcoming stress and finding a creative way to unwind at night so we can have better dreams, a more relaxed and refreshing sleep. Does that resonate with you? Yeah, I see some nods. Okay, great. And Rabbi Jeff Stombaugh wrote, Hashkiveinu is a request, try that again, is a request for that embrace, to provide a shelter over us, to give us protection and comfort, because we need to be held. We don't sing Ufros Aleinu Sukat Shlomecha to be rid of what haunts us. We sing to be better suited to pick ourselves up in the morning, to be renewed by the embrace of love and community. How does that feel? So there's an interesting piece. Oh, Micah, go ahead. You shouldn't raise your hand. You should just talk.
Well, I like to be respectful. Um, I'm so interested in this idea of holding. Trisha just put in the chat, hugging, like a hug.
Mm-hmm.
That, I was recently, I actually have a quote over here on my wall from Dr. Marsha Linehan, who's the creator of DBT therapy. She says, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection. And I was thinking about how the sukkah does not protect you from anything. If it's raining and you put up a sukkah, you still get rained on. If it's windy and you put up a sukkah, you still feel the wind. But that what actually helps us feel protected is connecting with others. So when you're in a sukkah, you can still see others, not only what's dangerous out there, but also other people that are out there. We can connect with others. And so it seems to me that maybe the Hashkiveinu is reminding us that, our prayers don't solve our problems. What they do actually is connect us with each other. And we find safety through connection versus always through exactly solving the problem. Doesn't mean we don't want to solve our problems, but that the first step is to find safety, which happens through the ways that we connect with each other.
Mm. Sometimes when people are talking, we're trying to be active listeners, and we get this, like, I'm a visual learner, so we get this flash of for me, I get a flash of a picture. And when you were talking, Micah, I had this flash of a photo in my head from a while back in my backyard before we fenced in our backyard. Our neighbors catty corner to us are also Jewish, and we have a sukkah and they had a sukkah, and we used to do like table wars, like you do at summer camp. And we would like sing back and forth to our Sukkot. And my son was very young then. And it was this extraordinary experience of teaching him that a sukkah wasn't a protection. So like for the rain, but it was a sense of connection. And when we put the fence up, we would do it over the fence for a number of years. And it was this connection back and forth. It was really lovely. So thank you for giving me that image. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in years because my son is now an obnoxious 18-year-old.
Hi.
So Bob has his hand up, and then Toby.
The idea of being hugged by God is so good because of your opening comments about being hugged by a dog. And after all, for those of us who are dyslexic, who can tell the difference?
Yes, there's a wonderful book of poetry. I have it at home. God Got a Dog. You should look it up. It's fantastic poetry. Toby, I think, was next, and then David.
I think that the saying that fences build good neighbors,
Mm,
I'm not so crazy about that because fences build strangers. They uphold strangers. That person on the other side of your fence, if the fence is high enough, you don't know whether your neighbor has even moved out and somebody else moved in. There's nothing. Where I live, we're not allowed to have those kinds of fences. We're only allowed to have something that is short and you can see through. And I still don't see my neighbors because they don't come out. But those that do, there's always a smile, there's always a wave, and eventually, what's your name? Where do you come from? And knowing your neighbors can really, especially if you don't have family nearby, can really be a blessing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. David.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Vann. I was just thinking, I live in the Seattle, Washington vicinity, but my parents still live in Tarrytown, New York, and I was at Temple Beth Abraham in September before the high holidays, and I attended a Selichot session with the cantor at the temple, and she talked extensively about the Hashkiveinu prayer, not the Hashkiveinu prayer. And I wanted to ask two things, basically. One about how the two words are related, if they're related at all, Hashkiveinu and Hashkiveinu. And I know I learned, I didn't really know this before, but Hashkiveinu means return, right? It means return. And also you mentioned when you showed us the traditional text that that they mentioned the word adversary or satan, and if you could say a few words about that as well.
Sure.
And
So,
how and if it shows up in other traditional prayers, the satan, if that shows up in our prayers.
okay. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. So, Hashkiveinu and Hashkiveinu, it's very easy to mix up those words. They actually don't have anything to do with one another. Hashkiveinu comes from the word shuv, which is to return, and Hashkiveinu comes from the word shochev, which is like to lay down. So, it'd be nice. But they're totally different. And Hashkiveinu is teshuvah. So we return. We use the idea of teshuvah, or returning to our best selves during the high holy days. And Hashkiveinu is our nighttime prayer. The idea of Satan, we have kind of stepped away from the idea of Satan in Reform Judaism. We don't like to think of that, and it's not part of our common prayer. So it's not really in our Reform liturgy. It is in the traditional. I don't want to say traditional. It's in the more, I'll use traditional because we don't have a lot of time. Liturgy, and in Hashkiveinu, and I don't believe it appears so often anywhere else. Micah, do you remember? I don't believe it's anywhere else.
Not that I can think of.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, there's a whole discussion to be had about what that is, right? Is it a being, an angel, an adversary? What there's an evolving tradition there, but I agree that it was taken out of the Reform liturgy in almost because in some ways there's an embodiment of evil or of temptation there that was uncomfortable, I think, for a more progressive liturgy.
Very much so. And there's if you want to read a book in the Bible that's fascinating about Satan, you can pick up Job, and be and really struggle with some pretty extraordinary text.
Yeah, I was surprised to see it in the prayer that in the Hashkiveinu prayer that you showed us.
Many of us are, right?
Thank you.
I remember my first liturgy course, and that was some deep struggling for me. Other questions?
Thank you.
How many I noticed there was a comment that somebody Trisha uses this prayer at night on a regular basis. Is there anyone else who does? So the Hashkiveinu is said in our evening liturgy, and it's part of the Shema Mitah, the bedtime Shema, as a sort of a calm down, right? So it's also, we say it, it's connected to the prayers between the Shema and Micha Mocha. It's part of the Shema rubric, and in the Talmud, they connected it to what we call the Geulah, the Micha Mocha. And one of the commentaries that I found is the reason that it was connected to the Geulah, to what we know as the Micha Mocha, is, I'll read just part of it. Hashkiveinu is a reminder of the fear the Israelites faced during the time of redemption. Therefore, we have the Hashkiveinu as part of this moment, as part of the Geulah or Micha Mocha, because we imagine the Israelites were terrified, right? They wanted to be not slaves. They wanted to imagine their redemption, their liberation, their freedom. But once you have that moment, then what? Then it's terrifying, right? Sometimes we be careful what we wish for, because then what do? Then we need that protection. We call out to God for Sukkot Shalom. right? For
I
shelter
absolutely,
of peace. Pardon, Toby?
1000% I agree with you. You want something so badly, and then it happens and you think, oh my, where do I go from here? I've been in that
Exactly.
place and it is very scary.
Exactly, right? And then we
Very
can get
scary.
into lots of conversations about the, the book of Exodus and what happens, right? So when we're scared to have, or when we need protection, when we need something and we want something and we need that safety, the Hashkiveinu becomes a real source of freedom, a source of safety and protection. And then with all of these beautiful comments from all of you, right? It's not an isolated protection. It's a connected protection, connected to one another, connected to God, connected to the earth, all of these things. Micah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one last thought, which is that I'm really moved by the connection between protection and redemption. That that Hashkiveinu, as in the Talmud, is part of the redemption prayer, and that you're construing it one way, which is, in the moment of redemption, we still need protection. And I think the other connection that occurred to me is that the fear that leads to a need for protection is also what leads us to want to redeem. In other words, we recognize that there are things wrong in the world, things we're afraid of, fights that need to be fought, problems that need to be solved. We feel afraid of those. We feel anxious about them. And when we find support and connection and protection in our fear, then we can actually move forward and work toward redemption. Like it says in Mishkan Tefillah, it talks about holding hands, marching together. There's that reading on the left side of the page by the Micha Mocha, where it says all you can do when you're in Egypt is hold hands and march together. And it occurs to me that the marching together is actually what you can do when you're holding hands. When you find safety in each other, then you can begin to do tikkun, and you can begin to bring a little bit of redemption.
Can I make one last comment, please? Can I make one last comment? So in yesterday's in Harris's concession speech yesterday, one thing that really stuck out to me is she said, "Now is not the time to throw up your arms. Now is the time to roll up your sleeves."
Thank you. Ellie.
I don't disagree with what you just said, Micah, but my concern that immediately popped into my head is that we live in this age of siloed information and siloed cohorts. And if we are looking for comfort with people who are on the same pathway as us, we become isolated from everybody else.
Does the sukkah then silo us more, Ellie? I lost you. There you are.
I'm sorry, I have vacuuming in the background. I can't really hear.
No. When you put your hand down, the screen moves around and I had to find you. So is there a risk of the sukkah then isolating us and siloing us? And do we need to work against that?
I certainly think we need to work against it, but maybe the imagery of a sukkah is what we need as opposed to a brick house.
I love that. Thank you.
I will concede that point to Ellie because she's my little sister and she's smarter than me, and I think she's right.
I'm also looking at, it's 12:31. So Micah, do I need to, can I give Bob the last comment?
Sure. Bob, last comment, then I think we'll wrap up.
Okay.
Well, when the Israelites left Egypt, they left armed, Elef, which I have always thought of in terms of weapons and in groups of 5 and ready to fight. But maybe they were holding hands.
Beautiful. That's a nice last comment. Thank you, Bob.
Well, let me thank Rabbi Allison Vann for this really wonderful discussion, very engaging discussion. And I want to thank everybody who engaged either by being here or by sharing your thoughts. It said, I think a real testament to the way that we can find connection through our tradition and in each other. Thank you to Rabbi Allison Vann Thank you to everybody for being here, and take
Thank
care.
you, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I have loved being with you.